Good morning, and thank you for coming. Our first panel on Monday morning, the first official day of the World Economic Forum. I'm Rhett Power from Forbes.com and CEO of a company called Accountability Inc. And it's a pleasure to be here at Greek House Davos and to welcome this panel for this important discussion about how Greece can and the tools that they need to sort of move forward and to create an environment where economic opportunity for all flourishes and business flourishes. If that's even a word. I think I just made up a word here Monday morning really early. So sort of in a lot of people say post-pandemic world, but I don't think we're in a post-pandemic world. I think we're still seeing the lingering effects of COVID. And so I wanted to ask the panel this morning, what can Greece do to reposition themselves to ensure a sustainable recovery that works for everyone in the economy? So I'll start, Hans. I'll start with you, and then we'll move down.
Well, first off,
I think it's on. It is on, yeah.
okay, now it's coming. Okay, great. First of all, I mean, it's great to be back in Greece, even if it's only virtual at the moment. Before the pandemic, I was in Greece a couple of times every year, both for business and vacation. And, as you may know, I mean, within Germany, and I'm German, I must admit, I know that we're not always that popular, not in Greece necessarily, but the Germans have a great yearning for Greece, and they always see, of course, Greece as the origin of all science and philosophy and wisdom, and in many ways also innovation. And I think it's really good to see that the current government has really taken back responsibility for its destiny and really tries to move Greece forward. I think one of the key elements is to make sure that you take a much more open approach, as the current government does, to trying out things, to open up to investment, to business, and not to see business and investors as the enemy who wants to take things away, but really to empower the people, to enable people, and to enable the whole country and society to move forward. And so when we talk about innovation, when we talk about startups, I think the key is not just for the government, but for the whole society to be open to change, to competition, to new approaches. And obviously it's important that the government makes it easy for new businesses to register, to try out things, to get all the necessary permissions, and not to create too many obstacles. We all talk about how important SMEs or MSMEs are for the overall development, for employment, for growth, for innovation. But then we very often think, okay, it's a matter just of money, and so the government will provide money. But what the government usually needs to do is to make sure that there is ease of business, of trying out things, also occasionally of failing. Obviously not in a fraudulent way, but failure is part of business. And then I think to encourage people, especially the young people, of course, the younger generation, to make it work, and so that they also feel, in their home country, there's a chance to really build something. And I think we are on a good path in Greece, over the past years, and so I think there's good momentum, and but I think that needs to be there for not just for a few years, but that needs to be there for the next decades. And it's not just true for Greece; it's true for the whole of Europe. Europe is the old continent in many ways. And therefore, of course, there is an aversion to change. We want to protect the status quo because almost half the population in Europe is above 50, like me, and therefore, people don't like change, and we need to make sure that we are open to change, and not try to protect the status quo or going back to any past, but really building the future and trying out things, even if it's uncomfortable at times.
Good morning, and I hope everybody enjoys this week here in Davos and in the Greek House. First of all, I used to work for BCG before entering politics, so it's a pleasure being on the same panel with you. What I do want to say is that when we were elected to office in 2019, one of our main goals was to rebrand Greece. Okay, so we have had a lot of negative publicity in the past, especially in the last decade. So we wanted to turn over this picture, and I think that to a large extent we have achieved it. And I want to be a bit more specific. Two indices that we had aimed to improve had to do with the Doing Business Index or the Global Competitiveness Report, where Greece was very far behind in the last decade, and we already have seen important progress in these indices. It doesn't mean, of course, that our job stops there. We have been making a systematic effort to significantly reduce bureaucracy for procedures that have to do with companies or even with citizens. We have decreased significantly the tax rates across sectors, trying to make the Greek economic environment much more attractive for foreign investments. For example, in R&D, we have increased tax rates from super deduction tax rates from 130% to 200%, actually establishing Greece as the most competitive country in the European Union on that issue. And we have attracted very important investments in the last 1.5 years, despite the pandemic crisis, despite the energy crisis. I would even say despite the migration crisis that we had in late 2019 and early 2020. So we have had investments from Pfizer, Cisco, EY, Amazon, Meta, TeamViewer, very important companies that see a great opportunity in Greece and have invested heavily in the country. This has acted very importantly, as we have managed to reattract many of our talented individuals, young entrepreneurs or scientists that had fled away during the financial crisis, but it has also given an important perspective for our young graduates that there is a future within Greece. Now, regarding research and innovation more specifically, we are trying to cultivate an environment where Greeks can feel certain that they can be competitive at a global stage from Greece. So allow me very quickly to say that we have introduced incentives for angel investors, for stock options. We increased the liquidity for the startup ecosystem during the pandemic crisis. We are creating innovation clusters, competence centers. We recently voted a new law for the framework of spin-off companies that work within universities and research centers, simplifying very much the procedure. We are also giving important tax cuts to smaller companies to invest in research and development. So we are making an effort to build an environment which will not only be friendly for investments, but will actually transform Greece in the coming years into the main hub of research and innovation in Southeastern Europe and the Balkans. I will stop here and continue later.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much. It's precisely for those reasons that I was so incredibly pleased to be asked to be on this panel, because of what the current government is doing. And we've had no discussions whatsoever, but I've been watching Greece for a long time. And to see a government that's so laser focused on increasing competitiveness in the ways you described. So it's a privilege to be here. One has the sense that you can make a real contribution. So let me just offer an overarching construct. I think Hans Paul nailed the big picture so well. I'll maybe add one layer to it, and then talk about perhaps a more specific granular area of opportunity that I think this toolkit can be applied to in the spirit of inclusive growth or innovation. So just one big picture thing I sense, I shouldn't assume, that we all agree, which is this false dichotomy between inclusive growth and on the one hand, so those things that ensure that no one is left behind, and innovation, growth, and investment, private sector dynamics, and market forces. This is the old politics that is killing us all. So this false distinction. So then what does inclusive growth mean in a paradigm that avoids that dualism? Well, it means, of course, fueling and ensuring some baseline level of performance, giving permission, social support to fail, but it then means unlocking incentives and opportunities for those who can create value. So from that big abstraction, just one specific construct. I think the way to target opportunities where the government can create the conditions of optimal attractiveness for investment. See, we'll get you can battle test these ideas. I pitch you on a construct for an idea for targeting ideas. And that is, on the one hand, where is the economic complexity of Greece richest? There's a huge legacy, so much of which is even more relevant today than it was when it was built, around logistics and shipping and transport. So finding areas of economic complexity, which are of course measurable, on the one hand, so this construct has three pieces. On the other hand, looking at the forces of change in the world that are most disrupting traditional market forces and incumbents, so there's opportunity. So let's take the fact that we're looking for 10 years now at unbelievably ongoing supply chain disruption. So that's just one trend as an example. The extent of supply chain disruption over the next decade is going to be unprecedented. Unprecedented from extreme weather events, from geopolitical conflict, from cyber attack. And so what does that mean? That means there's going to be a demand signal in the world for cyber-secure, robust supply chain logistics connectivity. Greece has economic complexity adjacent to that from its long legacy. And so then the third piece of the puzzle, and it's true that we can't overdo MSMEs, but at the same time, innovation is central there. So there's an opportunity for a cluster of opportunities around secure supply chains globally, an enabler of it through the Internet of Things, through cybersecurity, through digitally enabled supply chains, where Greece is a natural player, geographically, by virtue of its economic complexity, and by virtue of where the world's going. Just one example of a construct that I think could be applied more widely, where Greece couldn't be better positioned. And with this government, no doubt can do it.
Let me maybe just add one thing. I think what is very important is that we have a long-term stability in the overall mindset and direction. You know, what we see in some countries, for example, in Latin America, where we move from one extreme, you know, political extreme to the other. And the new government always undoes what the previous governments have done. And so I think what is very important, and we, luckily, I mean, I think in Europe we have avoided this so far, although there have been some developments where, you know, the retirement age has been increased and then it has been reduced again. You know, I think it's very important to ensure that, you know, similar policies will be pursued, you know, for not just for 4 years or 5 years, but for decades. So also building education, I think, is very important. I mean, you talked rightly about, you know, the importance for the young people to feel this is their home, this is a place where they can do this. So starting at school, you know, elementary school, to make sure that people are, you know, digital literate, that they see, you know, it's not the biggest aim should not be government service. Sorry, I mean, there's nothing wrong with government service, but if you know 70% of the young people want to leave school and go to government service, you have a problem. Yeah. So, and in Europe there is a tendency, you know, to go more to government service than to build their own business. So I think that, you know, right from the very beginning, I think in school, universities and so forth, there should be a mindset: I want to build something, you know, and of course, you know, all the government incentives and regulations that you described, and also the what you discussed in terms of, you know, how to make sure that you bring in the tools and so forth. But I think making good use of these things is only there when the overall mindset is there. And I think what is really good to see in Greece now is that there is a sense of, we really make this work. Yeah, we take destiny in our own hands, which I think is so important. And then, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's the whole issue of logistics, whether it's R&D in healthcare or in different software services, these are things that then will follow. Yeah, and I think there's also a very, very strong Greek diaspora across the whole world, really great, scientists, engineers, but also entrepreneurs all over the world, making sure that they also bring back some of their activities and their ideas to Greece in order to even, energize even more people. I think to make it a virtuous circle, and I think that's so important, because I think the ingredients are there now, but it needs lots and lots of reinforcement over the coming years and decades. Yeah.
Can I have 2 points on that?
Let's let Spiros.
No, go ahead. No,
Sure?
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, Irini, thank you very much for inviting me. Congratulations on what you have done. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, we see what the minister said. The government has taken all the right steps the last 3 years. 2019, 2020 was the pandemic. It was a year of crisis management. But we feel that Greece is very attractive both on a macro and micro level. Macro, why? Number one, yields are now close to 1%. This is a country that went through 3 bailouts from 2010 to 2015, worth more than 260 billion euros, and returned to the markets just in 2017. Secondly, the elephant in the room was the debt profile. I mean, yields were 8.3%, 8.3%, and now they are 1% at the fixed cost. So the macro level is very supportive. I think Greece is very attractive on a micro level as well. And we see 3 reasons why, supported by 3 themes, if you want. Mm-hmm. Reason number 1, I would say it's timing. Countries that are coming from, slower period of growth, like Greece and other countries, tend to catch up more quickly. So valuations are more attractive, and the price reward is more attractive. So we see a lot of companies with very attractive valuations in Greece, number 1. Number 2, what the minister said, people. We work with many companies in Greece, and we see a great pool of talent, not only at the sea level, but maybe 1 or 2 levels below the sea level. And that is very important, because global investors are backing the jockey, not just the horse. So that's very important. Number 3, we see a lot of appetite from private equities. According to the numbers, there are $3 trillion of dry power in private equity, which is money committed but not yet allocated. That's a big number. And probably countries like Greece should benefit from and get some of this capital to be channeled to very great companies, international businesses. We see that a lot. So people, timing, and capital out there. For us, we are a boutique investment bank, working with many private equity investors. Our 3 key sectors and themes that make the country very attractive. Themes, number 1, there are companies that are based in Greece, forget about shipping, companies that are based in Greece but derive a lot of their revenues outside the country. These are not Greek companies. These are international companies looking for capital to grow and tap new markets or buy other companies in adjacent markets. Theme number 2, there are some founders that are at retirement age, and they would welcome institutional capital for growth. And theme number 3, companies in Greece, like in sectors like pharma, FMCG, energy, that are looking to grow and could become fantastic platform for consolidation in the region and across Europe. So we see all these themes and these reasons, and we feel that, number one, the government has done everything it takes, and number 2, the global environment is very supportive. And I would be very happy to elaborate more.
Thank you. Deputy Minister, you were gonna say?
I would like to raise the issue on political stability, which I consider extremely important as well. Winston Churchill used to say that that politicians are called to predict the future, and when their predictions are not fulfilled, they are called to explain why they were not fulfilled. So it's very difficult to predict the future. But what I do want to say is that we have had in Greece our dose of populism, and we have even tested our democracy, our democratic institutions, our membership to the European Union very, very significantly. And it seems that despite the fact that we did have political parties that were even in the government that were quite populistic, that they now agree with mainstream politics in Greece. So that gives us a lot of confidence and optimism that even if there was a potential change in government, allow me to say here that the current government leads the polls with almost a double digit at the moment.
Very good.
But even if we did have a change of government in Greece, I am very confident that most of the policies would be continued, so we wouldn't have any extreme differences. At least that's my hope. Although my hope is that the government will be re-elected, to be honest. So I would dare to say that political stability will not be an issue in Greece for the next couple of years, at least to the extent that somebody can make predictions. Now, up until recently, the main goal in terms of employment for young Greeks was exactly what you described, joining the civil service. Of course, this intention is still alive in many Greeks, but now we have salaries, especially in the private sector, that are much better and working conditions than in the civil service. So we see more and more younger Greeks don't wanting to enter the civil service. More and more Greeks seeking to see how they can do something on their own. How they can start a company, how can they enter a company, gain the experience, and then try to create something on their own. So there is more and more. It's becoming more and more a trend to try to be, as you said, to be dependent on your own capabilities rather than somebody else. Then there's one more statistic that I think is very interesting to take into account. Unemployment in Greece has decreased to the lowest of the decade. We still have very high unemployment rate. It's a bit more than 12%. But please take into account that within less than 3 years, it has decreased by 5 percentages from 18%. Now it's less than 13%. I think it's 12.2%. And especially in the younger generation, where we had the highest unemployment rate now in terms of general unemployment, we are not the country with the highest unemployment rate in the European Union. We're the second highest for the last decade. We have been leading the numbers there. But even in youth unemployment, it has decreased by 13 percentages. So the trend is very dynamic of new employment opportunities, and the reason that we are focusing in R&D is because it does create very good job opportunities for our younger generation. Specific qualifications are needed for such employment opportunities, and we hope that we will be able to create more and more job opportunities on
I think that's exactly the point which I was also looking for, because inclusive growth means giving people a chance to have a job, to have a reasonable job where they can make an income, and that's why I think these basic numbers. I mean, we are talking a lot about R&D and innovation and so forth, but for people, earning a basic income, having a job is really crucial. That's why the unemployment figures are so important, also for being re-elected, and of course also for the young people. And I would like to add one other things, and that is, we now talk a lot about expanding the European Union in the Western Balkans, and Greece is just next to, the Republic of North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, and so forth. And I think also there. So, of course, Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So and Montenegro. So these are the 6 countries. While there has been a lot of reluctance, I would say, until the invasion of Russia. Now I think there is a lot more openness, even by the Dutch and the French and so forth, to say we need to include them. And I think that again gives new opportunities also to Greece. And I think that's that opportunity needs to be embraced in a very positive way, so that the logistics which you mentioned, and the whole issue of supply chains becomes even stronger, and you can really benefit from that. Given that the port in Piraeus has become a major port now for Europe. Yeah.
So we have 2 responses, and then I want to get to another question. So I'll go with
just a very quick point on.
No problem.
Please,
no, please.
Just a very quick point on what and build on what the minister said. I think that the crisis has forced the Greek entrepreneurs to be more creative and be more outward looking. So we see a lot of examples from founders that managed to build fantastic companies over the last 5 years, and companies that had been targets to major private equity firms, even major bulge bracket investment banks like Viva Wallet, which was a fantastic case in online payment. That was a $2 billion transaction. So we see a lot of this opportunities coming, and I think more will be coming in the future.
Thank you. No, go ahead.
Dive deep on mindset. Just this vitally important point that you made about mindset, and since in the context of this panel on policy innovation, one of the specific innovations we're seeing that is most powerful, I'm sure you've seen it too, but if not, you'll appreciate it, sir, and I think you will as well. It has to do with using cognitive analysis of how young people are making decisions about their pathway. And this is not inventing something new. It's actually simply making explicit something that in the most successful economies in the world, notably Germany, is implicit, which is where the pathways of choices at any given point in time for a young person are clear, and they've seen others do it. They know the pathway they're walking down. I think in Greece, as in many countries, and by the way, our clients in the Middle East are doing some fascinating work on this, because they also have a huge problem of so many people working, albeit for different reasons, so many people working in government, right? So then to actually discontinuously increase the extent to which young people are looking to the private sector for opportunities, you've got to understand the cognitive model that they're using as they approach each juncture in their education, their post-education, and then make policy interventions that make it as cognitively easy as possible to take a test to the private sector. So there are 2 sides to that. One is understanding when you communicate them what's out there. The other is giving them models, but then also understanding, are there policy interventions at a given juncture where we really could make it more viable for them to take this private sector pathway. So this becomes sort of in the private sector, we call it a customer journey. But this in the policy domain is a young person's employment journey, but making sure that they understand it. Because in a way we find, especially these Middle East countries have found, the biggest barrier to young people taking a new path of that kind is that they've never seen anybody do it. They have no idea what step is next. So it's a micro level policy innovation, but I guess that's part of the panel, so please.
Can I make a very, very quick statement?
Yes,
because I think I phrased something wrong. In terms of employment in the public sector, we are changing the procedure to a great extent, and the target must be to try to see how you can attract very talented and capable individuals in the public sector as well. So you do need good people in public administration. So we are changing the procedures. We are trying to see how we can attract people with more expertise across areas. So it's not trying only to pass the message to the younger generation that they should not only aim at the public sector, but it's also an issue within the government, within the administration, of setting the rules in such a way that you can attract very talented and capable individuals in public administration as well, because you need them.
So
Singapore's done this.
Thank you.
Against public service, don't get me wrong. And I wasn't, but it's very sorry.
I think, as you rightly said, we need very capable people, and we don't want to have an overly bloated public sector where people are just employed without creating value for the country. That I think we are all in violent agreement here. So and not pointing fingers at all. Yeah.
I'm a politician, so I have to be very careful in my words.
I understand this, and I also think there's always a danger of getting it.
So there's always a danger of getting it wrong, or being misunderstood. If somebody wants to misunderstand you, they will.
They'll find a way. That's right.
fair enough. That's a good point to transition on. So what is the role? The next question is, what is the role of? We've talked a little bit about the government's role. What is the role of private industry in this development, and trying to create an environment where entrepreneurship thrives? What are some tangible things companies can do to sort of help young entrepreneurs and the environment thrive? I guess is how I would put that. And I'll let anybody start that wants to jump in on that.
Can I just say
One thing, we always think that it's the government very often that wants to stifle business. Actually, it's the established businesses very often who make it difficult for new businesses to come up. They want the regulations because they have the lawyers and the people who can deal with all the regulations, whereas the small companies can't. And that's why I think making sure that there's competition and that also the big companies are not stifling that and trying to keep new competitors out. So I think we need to make sure. We always talk about competitive policies and business wanting to have an open market. Actually, we also need to make sure that big business is not try to stifle competition, as we see in many places where the big companies are swallowing lots of the small ones to make sure that there is no competition.
Yeah, I was on a panel the other day at the Global Investors Conference, and I had someone from a big social media company say exactly that. We were very good at slowing down any competition and using the government to do it, actually.
yes, absolutely.
So the role of the government, as we agreed, is to set the level playing field and definitely improve the situation day by day. We believe that we have done that to a great extent. In my view, the role of the private sector is to seek for more opportunities, to see how can they create more synergies within, but even outside the country. So increase the extroversity of the economy of the private sector. You very well mentioned the role of the Balkans and Southeastern Europe. We do want to have a leading role in the private sector, in the private economy, in the Balkans and Southeastern Europe. So it is crucial for us to see how we can increase the extroversity of the economy. And finally, I would add one more point that is important for me is also to increase the happiness, allow me to use that term, of their employees. It is an important issue to improve the working conditions under many people in the private sector work in Greece, raise wages in certain cases. So we have had an increase of a double increase of the basic wage in the last year coming from the government, and we are very confident that the private sector can deal with it very effectively. And as a government, we will continue to improve the situation where business is conducted in order to promote more opportunities for the private sector.
Just a quick point here. I agree that the government would set and is setting the foundation, but it's all about culture in the private sector as well. So the private sector has to create a culture for innovation, a culture for entrepreneurship, and if you want, there is a role for the universities here, a role of education, a role of creating the new leaders in the private sector. Greece is a small market and will always remain a small market. But as we said, there are great companies deriving a lot of revenues outside Greece. They have a very strong international base. So I think we should build on this and create the culture which embraces entrepreneurship and being more extrovert. That's my point.
Thank you so much. If I may, this is good. We can.
Thank you for
we
shuttling
can.
the microphone.
You bet. No, my pleasure. I'm like Greece. I'm optimally positioned in the logistics value chain. I am taking a small percentage each time the microphone passes. No, but all joking aside, I have a very strong view on this one. What can the private sector do? The private sector can do the policy work. What do I mean? Private sector is a machine for identifying how to generate returns. But it often does so within policy constraints that it takes for granted. Yes, there's some lobbying here and there, but what we've seen, Korea was a master of this, is if the private sector, if the government is creating a level playing field and expresses, as the current government in Greece does, this willingness to be supportive, then what the private sector can do is just reset the parameters by which it evaluates opportunities. What do I mean? For example, this role as an integrating hub in the region. There are business opportunities there that if the Greek government were to provide policy support in some specific ways, the universe of opportunities, I'm certain, would increase by 50%. But so many private sector entities don't do the work. They don't want to hire the lawyers, pay the money to figure out what is the policy support we would need to triple our growth and employment and become an integrating hub in this sub-region. So what we've seen, and this is from firsthand experience, that when the private sector does the policy work and comes to government and says, here's what we need, especially with this Greek government, the potential is unlimited. But there's a laziness, there's a disinclination, there's a lack of awareness, sometimes in the private sector, to really, I just would say, what I mean by laziness is this. Laziness to consider business models that would be possible if 3 policy parameters were changed, and then come to the government to change them. Lazy too harsh? I got a
Yes,
frown
it's
from
a
my
bit.
friends.
It's a bit harsh, I would say.
Just on that front.
Because I mean, if laziness means, slowing things down, as you said, then I would really worry. And I'm not sure, that the country that you used as an example is really a good example for businesses being very active. Yes, that business, in that country, businesses was very active, to concentrate power within a few groups. So I think one needs to be.
Oh, I just meant they were good at business coming back and saying what they needed from government in a few areas. So they said, we can grow tremendously, yeah. We need support here.
But I think, you made a very important point. I think, we have many smaller countries, in Greece, like the Netherlands, where, people are very active in Finland, even in the Baltics and so forth. So I think one should not assume just because you are a small country, you cannot be very entrepreneurial. Actually, you can be even more entrepreneurial because there's a clear need, as you rightly said, not just, to sell in the Greek market, but to sell to the rest of the world. But also, I think, to bring in the talent, from the Greek talent that is spread across the whole world. Make use of that talent, reach out to them. Make sure that they do bring some of their ideas back, some of their capital back, and so forth, to start up new things and so forth. And I think, in that sense, also the smaller countries can be even more connected because of the need to go beyond the small local market. Yeah.
And on that stage, we recently announced the creation of a research institution on AI, artificial intelligence, attracting Greek academics from the US, from Boston, coming to Greece, sharing their time between the US and Greece equally 50%. We are also taking advantage of a network of well-esteemed academics across the world, and are creating an institute on robotics, which has to do with practically all of the sectors of the economy. So making good use of the Greek diaspora is an advantage for us. And in fact, we have a well-established diaspora throughout the world, but we also have people that left the country due to the financial crisis for economic reasons, and now have very good jobs, which do want to return to the country. We even gave them specific tax incentives to come back to the country, make good use of their expertise in order to create multiple synergies within the countries. So we established for the first time the vote in the general elections of our Greek diaspora. So we have taken important steps to see how we can work with our fellow citizens throughout the world. And
can I just add one other small thing onto? It's so important to see digitization not as the replacement of human beings by AI, robotics, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, remember the discussion before the pandemic when everybody was worried that we will already replace, consultants, government officials, whoever, by some robots or some AI system. And this discussion has gone. But, because in Europe, because of the sheer demographics, we will run out of people before we run out of jobs. That's why embracing technology is so important in order to really combine human beings with great technology to become much more productive. And so to allow for the demographics not to be the big drag that it could potentially be. And that's why I think, especially for the countries in Europe, it's so important to make sure that people are not afraid of digitization, of all the technology, but see it as a big enabler for moving forward. And investing in that and investing in many companies who come up with solutions for lots of things, is really crucial. So I can only applaud, the Greek government efforts to do that. And all over Europe, we need to do this, and we need to fight the spirit of anxiety that comes with technology. Very often people worried about being replaced. Yeah.
So, real quick, just to follow up, and I'll let you get to it. Spiros, you brought up an interesting question, and the minister was addressing it. The role of the university in all of this technology. Is there a need to reform the higher education system, maybe even the primary education system in Greece, so that you're building that bench of talent for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road? Is there anything being done, or is there reform being done in that area so that you're graduating people from university that can go into things like blockchain and AI? And so I guess a focus on STEM education would be a question.
Definitely, and as I said, we recently changed the framework for spin-off companies. Our main goal is to see how we can link research more effectively with innovation and entrepreneurship, and in many cases, research conducted in universities and research institutes does produce important results, but we didn't even have technology transfer offices in universities and research centers, so it was difficult for academics to transform their research and ideas into a product. Yes, we are changing the way that universities are functioning, trying to modernize their way. We had very important functioning problems. We didn't even have the previous government changed a lot of our policies. For example, we didn't have masters or even bachelors in foreign languages, and we do want to see how we can attract people in Greece to study classics, tourism, farming, irrigation, but even economics, finance, and other things. So we are doing a lot of important structural reforms in our universities and research centers. But even in secondary and primary education, we have changed a lot of the syllabus, trying to adjust it to the needs of a modern society. So teaching entrepreneurship, as you well stated before, and Spiros did, at lower levels, trying to introduce coding in all ages. So there have been very, very important structural changes in our education system. Of course, when you proceed to important changes in the educational system, it's something that you cannot see it immediately. It's a seed, but it's absolutely necessary to do it on time. I would dare to say that we were very slow as a country to understand that that is something that should have started more than a decade ago, but we have corrected it. We have made important changes. We are trying to see how we can further modernize our education system at all levels in order to have graduates that are capable to adjust to the modern needs. This is something that practically is impossible, and that's why we are also investing in reskilling and upskilling of our current labor force, because I, for example, studied at university in the beginning of the 2000 decade. What I learned at university then is almost obsolete today. If you don't learn every day and follow the advancements of your science, then you are left behind. Individuals today must have the ability at all ages, across sectors, to be capable to adjust to the needs of a modern society.
I mean, this is where that public-private partnership with corporations and technology companies really could be a real benefit.
And that is why we are making very good use of the cohesion money from the EU in order to see how we can link academic institutions with companies across sectors in order to find practical solutions in the business world, or even solutions in social problems.
Just one quick point. I'm not a politician, but I think that for the first time in Greece, we see joint programs with major U.S. universities like Harvard, Columbia, MIT, and I think the Minister of Education is doing a fantastic job.
What about Stanford?
We have a Stanford grad up here.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we have to do.
The Prime Minister is a Stanford and double Harvard, actually. So I think that's a great initiative, Minister, and I think you should continue that. And we see a lot of young people willing to follow an entrepreneurial career rather than join the public sector or join big companies, and I think that's a very good trend.
Yes, Christian Hadjiminas. I'm belong to the EFA group. We are in aerospace and defense, operating out of Athens. I wanted to say that in Greece, because we had a liability as private institutions, the liability was that few years ago, when there was a crisis in Greece, a lot of people left, which is what we call a brain drain. And today, that growth has come back, and we have a very pro-business and very surgical intervening government. We were faced, and we are faced with a problem that we didn't have enough people with skills. and it was not yet the time that you can really offer the salaries that those people that left, because they left, they went to Germany, England, the USA with big salaries, so we could not really attract them. So we were forced, and that's turning a liability into an opportunity, and this is something that happened the last year, 2 years. We were forced to look into ourselves and try to find, because we could not even find software engineers, for instance, right? So what we had to do is we had to act as a company, as a group, to re-educate people, invest in reskilling them, and of course go to the universities and take them from the beginning. So there is a transformation going on, and again, it was because of necessity. But I'm Greek, of course, I'm prejudiced, but in Greece we have tremendous engineers, tremendous. The only thing that they were missing was the link to the market, really. So I think a lot of private companies, and because of the EU funding now, we hope to be able to complement this with this reskilling. It's very important. And to add to your point about digitization, you're absolutely correct. And we've explained that to our people. But digitization is very, very easy to happen, as you may laugh about that. But for instance, in our group, we have workers who have just finished technical schools or maybe just high school, right? And we are starting them from, it's easier to start them, especially if they are on the younger generation side, to start them from zero and explain to them how they can do, because digitization, as you say, it's not about robots, it's about using technology to automate processes. And it starts working, because Greeks are again, I'm prejudiced, I admit that, of course, but because Greek people are very, very multitasking people. Okay, so I just want to say that as a hope. There's a transformation from within the companies, the private sector, on its own, because we had to, not because we design a policy or something. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to the panel here. Thank you. Anybody else have a follow-up?
As a consultant, when there's a government that's doing so many things right, I mean, so for example, you're already doing it, but I'll just say that, as Hans-Paul made the point, if you were to ask me what is the first and most valuable thing I can imagine doing for inclusive growth in the long term, it's this digital skilling from the beginning. And the trouble is the political dividends are paid in the long term. And so if ever there were a case where building bipartisan consensus to ensure that those reforms endure, that would be it. I can already tell, having heard you speak for 30 minutes, that you're doing it. The other way is to increase the return cycle by doing the reskilling of the current labor force. And that's a place where the government can also help to make that easier for companies to do. But the third point is a narrow point about an opportunity in the defense space caused by the war in Ukraine, a long-term opportunity, but I don't think that's our focus. So I'm going to pass it back to you.
So I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and take it in a little different direction. Is capital, are companies always going to leave Greece when they get to the stage that they need capital? Because capital is hard to come by. So what is the panel's view on how we deal with that question, that challenge? Because getting venture capital and seed funding is hard to do even in the United States or in Europe. And so in Greece, there aren't that many options. There aren't that many funds. How do we solve that problem for Greek entrepreneurs and people who want to grow businesses and who want to stay home?
I'm not so sure whether capital is really the big bottleneck, quite honestly. I mean, as you have said right at the beginning, there are $3 trillion waiting to be invested. I think so many venture funds, private equity. They are looking for opportunities, and they are looking for opportunities not just in the hotspots, but also more and more in the periphery. So I'm not so worried. I mean, of course, the traditional banks are more careful, and given that there are some clouds on the horizon, people talk about recession. But I think in terms of the private equity funds, the venture capital funds, there is so much money, and so I think the key is of course, to provide opportunities for young companies to show what they are doing, and of course then to engage with the funds to make it work, even if probably Greece is not maybe the focus area of many of the funds, but I think to make sure that they are coming, that they are seeing what's going on, I think that could be a big opportunity. I would caution to say, government has to provide cheap funding for everything, because government should not be the major investor, because when things go wrong, people say the government wasted money. I remember, when the German government invested money in two vaccination companies, one was very successful, BioNTech, and the other was, a failure, correct? And, everybody said, oh, the government wasted 300 million, But, that's why I think the government cannot be the major investment. It can help, with some funds, but I think the making sure that the funds are seeing the opportunities and that you bring together funds and potential startups. Yeah.
I would also add on that the lack of capital was certainly a problem of the last decade, but I don't think it's an issue now. Of course, everybody would want more and more capital. You can never say no to something like that, but we do have important venture capital funds. We are now looking that more and more family offices are also investing a lot in research innovation and are seeking for additional business opportunities. So if we add that up to the fact that we are making use of the cohesion money, we are also making use of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which was a result of the pandemic crisis and an EU policy, and we are seeing Greek startups attracting more and more interest from venture capital funds across the world. I would dare to say that the main issue is not capital. As I said, it is definitely important, and we always want more and more available capital, but is to see how Greek entrepreneurs can find their way to the international market. And in fact, in a globalized world, it's not only an issue to see how a startup can get capital from a Greek venture capital fund to be competitive within the national borders. You want to see how you can be competitive across the world. So more and more startups coming from Greece are looking for opportunities outside Greece to see how they can be competitive all over the world, or even more and more startups outside Greece are seeking to find opportunities and build bridges with the Greek ecosystem. So in an interconnected world, startups within Greece do have access to capital. Finding good coders, finding good employees might be at the time a bigger challenge.
Dr. Bergner, I know you have to leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think that capital is not an issue. Private equity firms, of course, look at stable governments and stable countries, but private equities are not investing in countries. Private equity is investing in companies that they can become platform for acquisition. They can be scalable. They have revenues outside the country. They have good management, and at the end of the day, they have a good exit, because private equities always want to have a good exit. So I agree with the minister. I don't see a big issue. I see a lot of companies attracting foreign capital. And an example, in 2015, in the middle of crisis in Greece, major private equity firms invested in Greece. BC Partners, for example, invested in a fantastic pharma business called Pharmathen. CVC started, which is a $150 billion fund, started investing in the Greek healthcare sector in 2017. in the middle of the crisis. And we see that to continue. And as a firm, we're very proud to have advised in transactions with both private equity firms, these private equity firms. But that's a different story. We see a lot of appetite, and we see very good companies with good management.
Okay.
I think I would just say that in terms of the volume of available capital, that's certainly not an issue. But I do think, and we're seeing this globally, this applies not just to Greece but to the world. I mean, we're at a moment in history in which the dynamics of risk, the profile of risk for investors is so uncertain that I think that there is a decisional obstacle that nobody can snap their fingers and make go away, but an incredible government like yours can begin to think about how might we, in the near term, over the next 6 months, think about this current risk profile so that we capture our share of the capital that is willing to flow. And I don't think it's, so yeah, the volume's out there, but I think that's a crucial thing. That's why I started with that odd idea at the beginning. I think that the investable opportunities are going to be those that are robust with respect to the specific structure of the risk landscape right now, which is different than it's been in 40 years.
It's also about the right kind of entrepreneurs and businesses, because I mean, this money is being invested in certain sectors, right? And so I think looking at the certain sectors that are where money is flowing and deals are being made, I think is something we've got to talk about and pay attention to. I know this sir, did you have a question or?
Yeah, in fact, I have 2 points to make.
Okay, good. And I wanted to get the audience involved a little bit.
Yes. No, I need to leave, so just two things. I come from Belgium, and I do a little bit of business from Greece. So 2 things I wanted to say. Belgium is a country which flourishes on SMEs. 80% of the revenue government receives is from SMEs. If you speak to all the ministers, if you speak to all the government officials, they have a definite program for SMEs to flourish. I think Greece can adopt this model. When I started business in Greece, the biggest problem was the SMEs were dying. So we could not trust them for the money, for the advances, for these things. So this was one point. Another point was the branding of Greece, the advertisement. When I started business with Greece, I started with cotton. And when I shipped cotton to India, most of the Indian cotton users, they were saying, cotton from Greece, never heard before. So we sent them the first containers. They loved it. You have the most beautiful, fantastic cotton in the world. They were just used to this American cottons because they advertised, they branded themselves. So the branding is very important for any country to flourish. These are my 2 comments. Unfortunately, I have to leave, but I'm going to come back and may have some small word with you. Thank you so much.
So we're about an hour and 15 minutes in. We have another 45 minutes scheduled. Are you guys all right answering questions for a few more minutes?
Of course.
Yeah, okay, good. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and let's stick to the theme that we're talking about here, so that if we could.
So I actually have 2 questions. The first one is sometimes when I hear about creating innovation hubs and AI, robotics, and blah blah, it's the same for every country. I'm from Spain. We share many of the challenges that Greece has, and it seems like we're all trying the same answers. So like, is it gonna work for all of us? Is it gonna work for some of us? Or what, does Greece have any specific advantage that will make it thrive in robotics and AI?
First of all, investing in AI and robotics, in my view, is crucial for every country. It doesn't mean that necessarily one of the 2 investments in one country or another country will survive or not, or will be very successful. You can have many investments in both sectors in the same country, in the same city. Especially AI and algorithms and big data are now used practically in every aspect of economic life. The same applies for robotics as well. What we are trying to see is we have created these institutes within a research center that already exists, trying to link it very well with companies in Greece, with businesses in Greece. We do believe that the future of the economy the present of the economy, but year by year will increase more and more. So whether that have to do with drones in the defense area, whether that has to do with using robotics in the industry, in all sectors of industry, using algorithms and AI in digital platforms, in analysis of data. These are priorities, in my view, that every country should take and should follow and should invest more and more on these, and try to see how you can link it to the national industry. And why not, if you do succeed, also export this this knowledge you have. So it doesn't necessarily go competitive. It is competitive at a global stage, but it is important for a country to invest in it. And the sooner you invest in it and you gain expertise, the better it is for a country, since you start building and have a competitive advantage.
This is such a, first of all, 100%. And when you said linking it to industry, this is a fascinating question. I'm lucky to know Spain well. I spent a lot of time there growing up. But I'll just say, I think your question gets at the heart of it, and it gets to the heart of the error that so many countries make. Because as you implicitly say, if we do an AI hub, it's a generic AI hub anywhere in the world, and we're competing with countries with infinitely more resources, it's a losing game. But AI, the most promising and certain advances in AI with economic returns that can be demonstrated, are not artificial general intelligence and some broad abstract thing that maybe decades from now will occur. It's in narrow specific domains of the economy. So this idea of economic complexity, the specific sectors where an economy has strength, then for a country, be it Greece or Spain, to understand that economic complexity, and then let's take the case of AI, build an innovation hub that is looking at the application of AI, meaning the data sets in that sector, diving deep into those. That's a differentiated AI hub that will generate real economic value to the participants in the cluster around it. That's not competing with a Greek one on a different, in a different domain. I gave my hypothesis of one of those. That's the key. So I think this laser focus on differentiation couldn't be more important. In the case of AI, we already know that that's where the money is. It's not on the abstract AI skills, but the cross-cutting investment, as the minister said so correctly, is in getting the population ready to do AI in general. You've got to have the feedstock of people who can go do it. But the actual investments are going to be best in places where there's economic complexity to which the data can be applied. Sorry for speaking so long.
No, that's great.
Well, just a quick point. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, number one. And number two, I think that countries like Greece and Spain and other peripheral countries will catch up in areas like AI and artificial intelligence and robotics much quicker than other mature countries.
I guess olive oil might be a bone of contention.
You mean it in the sense of leapfrogging, because of the need to leapfrog in order to be competitive. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience?
May I ask, going to the area of the startups and the innovation where it happens and it starts, Greece is making also some significant moves and developments in the last years, like Elevate Greece, for example, the first time that the whole startup ecosystem has been mapped in one place and one website with all the clusters, incubators, VCs and so on. My question mainly to the market side of the panel would be, and that comes back to one of your questions also that you had put previously. At some point, young startup companies, they need to go through that valley of death. They need seed capital, they need angels, they need venture capital. What can be done in order to develop more that venture capital landscape, that ecosystem on that side, or on the angel side, for those young startup companies not to be forced to leave and look outside of Greece to capital? What can we do to have more of that in Greece in order to help that startup ecosystem to flourish on side? As far as I know, venture capitalists, angel investors would like to have their investment in their backyard. So I suppose
You mean from a private point of view or from a government point of view?
also from a private point of view, or if it's something that the government could additionally do beyond what they're doing already.
Well, I think the minister already answered that, creating an environment of supporting these companies. From a private point of view, I think that companies should constantly look for capital, either in Greece or outside Greece, from global investors or local investors, and create a culture that is attractive to venture capitals, not necessarily in the country. That's why we see a lot of people from Silicon Valley, and we see a lot of Greek companies going to Silicon Valley, and we see a lot of people from Silicon Valley coming to the country. So, and I think that will continue for the years to come. I don't know if Christian wants to.
Can I add on that? What I would want to see more, and what we're trying to do is actually inspire the younger generation, especially through the education system, in secondary and primary education, that entrepreneurship is exciting, that entrepreneurship is you're capable of actually unleashing all of your talent, and that through entrepreneurship you can do something that you're passionate about and can be very successful financially. It doesn't mean obviously that every startup or every young person will become a startupper, or that every startupper will be successful, but actually trying to change the culture of our society, especially in the younger ages, for me would be crucial. So what I would aim doing in the next years, and we have set a very good level playing field. We can do more to give more incentives, and we're working on that. But what I do think would be a game changer would be to inspire the next generations that entrepreneurship is something good, something which will allow them to fulfill their dreams and become very successful.
I'll just say on that one, 100% agree. And that's where, in terms of these specific policy innovations, this is not exactly an answer to your question, but it's just to build on this. These new tools by which young people are given pathways and models, it's funny. A lot of it is, once they're hooked that the idea is great, that it's promising, still that gap can be, but how do I begin? How would I begin? When they start to have seen examples and case studies. By the way, what I'm talking about here, there are just collateral tools in the schools where they're seeing cases of how the Greek guy did it, step by step, what government resources are available. It's hard to emphasize, but I think it's crucially important. I think it's an order of magnitude difference in uptake. But anyway, to your point, though, about proximity, if I've understood it correctly, I think the diaspora point that we discussed earlier is so crucial. And the neat thing is, it's just intuitively logical that a diaspora would matter. But it's actually empirically demonstrated that FDI flows and investment are highly correlated with diaspora exchange. And it pertains to your question about the backyard. Because the backyard can be either geographic, or it can be through trusted networks, social trusted networks. So if you're my countless Greek friends in the United States, I mean, if you're Greek, you know people in Greek, the distance doesn't matter if you know. And so I think leveraging the diaspora is one way to reduce geographic distance. Leveraging the diaspora is crucial. Of course, again, it's tough on this panel. The government's already doing so many things so wisely. You don't give us a chance to give some breakthrough advice.
We need your advice, though, and we need ideas. More and more ideas are always useful and necessary.
Who'd like you to write about it, right?
So,
of course.
So I have a, and this has been a marathon panel, and I appreciate everybody's participation, and I do have.
Is that an intentional Greek reference?
It was. And I'm Irish, and I you know, I want to wrap it up today with, and talk about something that's a hot topic in business right now, and that is cryptocurrency and blockchain. And we're talking about today about tools that can help create a sustainable environment that everybody's going to benefit from. What is your view on blockchain and cryptocurrency and NFTs, and how that is going to impact entrepreneurship, business, and is it something that it'd be interesting to see what the minister's view on that is. But you know, this is, I think, something that is here to stay. What form it looks like, or what it looks like going down, in the future, is debatable. But I know there's a lot of talk of regulation and how to regulate it. At the same time, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Comment.
First of all, you cannot ignore it, even not at national level, even at European level. It's there. It's a reality, and there are even discussions about whether the European Union, apart from the euro, should adopt some form of a cryptocurrency or blockchain policy. I would dare to say that it's still a very there is a lot of instability, and I think it's something that we actually evidenced in the last 2 months after the war in Ukraine. But there is instability in all of the sectors.
All currencies, right?
Exactly, of the economy and currencies. So it is a reality that national governments or the European Union will have to deal with it more and more and have a specific policy on it. And if I have to dare a prediction, I would say that the European Union will have to follow in some sort of formal adoption of some form of cryptocurrency in the near future. Some countries have already formulated specific policies on it. A few countries, though. So it's still in the beginning if we're talking about public policies. But it's a reality that you will have to deal with and face it in the European level. It would be at an EU status. It will not be an issue for one country only, as we do have a common currency. So it's a reality that you have to deal with.
So yeah,
but there will be. I think there will be country-specific things about tax and correct. Right.
Well, we see a lot of global funds over the last two years investing in cryptocurrency, and we see a lot of appetite, if you want, from global family offices to learn more about it. Whether this is here to stay or not.
A little bit less last week, a few phone calls last
yeah,
week.
that's true. That's true. But whether this is here to stay or not, I would agree with the minister. It's remains to be seen. But we see a lot of appetite. I mean, more than we expected.
And by the way, it's like an Italian joke. I mean, I'm from New York, so I can make an Italian joke. It's like, let me be brief. But this area is so fascinating. Your question's so important. I wanted to speak before the minister this time, so he wouldn't say we're already doing it. Of course, what he said I agree with.
We're not doing it.
I tried to take first mover advantage, but let me give a really specific perspective on this that I think will be responsive to your question and hopefully helpful. So there's this huge tension. By the way, I think the number's 52 countries. Number might be wrong. I'll double check it. That are formally and seriously exploring central bank digital currencies. As you say, right. Europe would do that as a whole. And of course they should do it. It has so many efficiencies and it gives incredible control. And that's the key. Where there's a debate, and I think there's an opportunity even for Greece, is between the inclusive opportunities of cryptocurrency. So they have some benefits of financial inclusion. They have huge advantages in terms of innovation and disintermediate exchange, but they have huge risks of a lack of control. So for fraud, for money laundering, they're used by criminal networks. As we know, cybercrime is being monetized through cryptocurrencies, and so that's a huge risk. It's the last thing Greece or anybody else needs, is to become perceived as or a hub for illicit behavior using crypto. At the same time, the innovation has a lot of value, as you said. And so then what's the dividing line? Well, then given that Europe almost certainly will pursue, and it should, I think, a central bank digital currency that would be interoperable in exchanges with others, but then not to put the fire out on crypto, but to see where it's most useful. One example is logistics, trade, and shipping, where the use of, and that's where distributed ledger technologies, of which crypto is one manifestation, for port exchange, we're seeing use cases that are incredibly powerful for streamlining, for basically, as you know, so much is still paper-driven at ports to this day, where, of course, using DLT technologies for Greek ports, and if Greece becomes, as I could imagine it being, an enabler of secure, global, reliable trade and supply chains, then being strong in those aspects of DLT, for example, at port exchanges, so where you know, 3 miles out from the port, it's all done. There's no paperwork. It's all done through DLT. That could be a huge source of competitive advantage. It builds on economic complexity that Greece has. It's robust with respect to the future. That's not subject to illicit problems. So I think that delineation between CBDCs, crypto where there's innovation, you can use it, but then DLTs where it's got tremendous value is useful.
That's really, that very nicely said. Any comments, thoughts before we wrap up? Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the superb moderation.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank our online audience. So,
You could have mentioned that earlier.
and I want to thank them for joining us here online as well, here in Davos. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a pleasure.